Well, maybe the most common question in pawn structures is isolated central pawn. Well, let's look at this opening. That's a Caro-Kann opening. Knight c3, e6, knight f3, bishop e7, cd, and knight takes d5. Now, this pawn structure is probably maybe the most common pawn structure in chess today. Well, you know, you can have this position with a pawn structure where white has weak pawn on d4 and also strong pawn on d4 at the same time because controls number of central squares, and we can also have a mirror image of this position. In other words, this weak pawn black may have. For instance, well, if we play this position, just regular queen's gambit position, it can be the other way around. c5, e3, and knight c6, c takes d, e takes d, bishop e2, bishop e7, dc, bishop c5. Now black has a weak pawn on d5, isolated pawn, and the white has a square outpost on d4, but black has more space and better piece placement. Now these positions are very, very most difficult position to play and most important to understand, because sometimes you're going to get these positions whether you want it or not, for one side or the other side, and you can get these positions from number of different openings. You can get it in Sicilian, you can get it in Nimzo Indian, you can get it from Caro-Kann, from Queen's Gambit declined, Queen's Gambit accepted. This is the most common pawn structure, isolated central pawn. And there are players that love to play with this pawn, and there are players that love to play against it. And very frequently, it determines the placement of each piece will make any difference. Now, what will prevail? Playing for a weakness or neglecting the weakness, protecting and taking advantage of some space and developing attack on a king side? It may work both ways. And now we cannot keep talking about it because this is the subject that may take several hundred hours, and the people played all their life, and even they're very far from perfecting it, from playing it flawlessly. Now let's look at one position that can come from Caro-Kann defense: e4, c6, d4, d5, ed, queen takes d5, knight c3, queen a5. Now this and after knight f3, knight f6. Now this pawn structure after bishop d2, e6, knight e4, queen d8, knight takes f6, and gf. Now this is pawn structure that we got here from some weird type of Scandinavian or center counter opening. It frequently can be done by playing a regular Caro-Kann: e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, de, knight takes e4, knight f6, and after knight takes f6, gf. Well, you can see that I used to play this all the time for black. And it's interesting, is this a weakness really? Or maybe it represents the strength? It's both. Now, what black wants to do, black has a weak pawn on h7, which can be taken advantage of only in the end game, and as you can tell, we are very, very far from the end games here. If knight f3, then bishop g4 or bishop f5, And game can continue approximately like this: e6, bishop d2, knight d7, white castles, queen c7, king b1, black castles, and rook e1. Now this is interesting pawn structure. Black has no weaknesses. This pawn structure with the pawns on e6, f6, and f5 by no means represent any weakness. So what would white want to do here? The good thing for white, well, black may go f5. Good thing for white, if white goes c4 and bishop d6 and now queen e2. In position like this, black has pawn structure that controls almost every square in its center. What do we do about it? The good move is d5. Now, it serves several purposes. First of all, we are attacking the pawn on a6, and black has to react some way. If black plays cd, cd, and ed, well, then they have immediate problem with the c-file. But even if king was on b8 and we somehow can get the pawn back, then you see that f7 and f6 pawn are clear weaknesses. And if black reacts by playing e5, that creates new weaknesses, very close to the weaknesses we saw in a previous game in a Scotch opening, where white occupied d4 and c5 square with minor pieces. Now they can go knight h4, followed by knight f5, where knight is going to mount on f5 and will be a dominating factor in this position. And then queen e4, black has very bad structure. So knowing it is very important. Now black knows what they have to avoid, and white knows what they have to try to do, what position they are aiming for. So this position, again, if black accomplishes f5, knight f6, knight e4, may be very good because they have better control in the center. If white does d5 and somehow forces black to push e5, it's going to backfire for black, this pawn structure. So you have to know, you have to equip very well with positional ideas about the pawn structure. Okay, I have this and this pieces. I have dark square bishop. He doesn't have light square bishop either with bond. So f5 square is very vulnerable. I want to put my knight on it, so d5 is good. So based on what kind of pieces we have left on the board, I know what pawn structure I need. So pawn structure frequently is decision on what pawn structure you need frequently depends on what pieces you have left and what weaknesses it may create in the near future. Now let's look at some position of Queen's Gambit declined. Bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, castles, knight f3, h6, bishop h4, b6, c takes d, knight takes d5, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, knight takes d5, and ed. And what I want to see here, castle c5, d takes c, b takes c. Well, we can get to this type of pawn structure many different ways, and we see that black has pawns on c5 and d5. It's a great pawn center, controls a lot of squares in the center, but these pawns are standing, don't forget, they are standing on the open files, D and C files. Now what are they really? Are they strength or are they weaknesses? So is this good or bad for black? There is no way of generalizing this either, because if black manages to go knight d7 and a5 and rook c8, they're going to have very good grip on a queen side and control most of the center. So this position is simply not good for white because black is dominating. But on the other hand, if white manages somehow to put substantial pressure on this D and C pawns, that may represent serious problem for black. Okay, let's look now at one of the games that I previously analyzed on one of my tapes. I think it's positionally one of the best, better games you can see between top two players in the world. At that time, it was World Championship match between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky in 1972. C4, Bobby Fischer is white, E6, knight F3, D5. That's the kind of pawn structure we're going to get, and you see what happened at D4, knight F6, knight C3, bishop E7, bishop G5, castle, E3, H6, bishop H4, B6. Fischer is white. This is all modern theory. It does not need to be analyzed, and we wouldn't want to analyze anyway because we're not going to discuss the opening part of this game. Bishop takes E7, queen takes E7, knight takes D5, ED, rook C1. Now after rook C1, bishop E6, queen A4. White sees here that black must go C5, otherwise they have great difficulties concluding development. C5, queen A3, pinning the pawn. After queen A3, rook C8 has to be played to protect the pawn. Bishop B5, A6, D takes C, B takes C, and castle. Here we go now. We have the pawn structure we just discussed. Now, white has some kind of a pressure on these pawns, and you see that white cannot just put more pressure on C pawn and win this pawn. It's not as simple. You see how pawn structure, white wants to change pawn structure in during the game based on the position. You see, this actually interesting how it's been done. After castle, rook A7, now black is threatening to take white's bishop, since rook is protected on A7, bishop E2, knight to D7, and knight to D4. Obviously, CD cannot be done because rook is hanging on C8 and queen is hanging on E7. And after queen F8, knight takes E6 and pawn takes E6. Now, what's the idea of giving this knight for the bad bishop on E6 and let black strengthen their pawn center? Now black has no weaknesses, very strong pawn center, and it looks like black is doing fine. And it's not exactly so. White has very strong bishop on E2. It does not look very strong now, but after E4, you see what that's the main plan for white. Now they want to change the pawn structure again. Well, what white is trying to do, they're trying to take on D5, and then in this case, these pawns will become easy targets for white's pieces. On the other hand, if black plays D4, which they did, then light square bishop becomes very, very powerful on C4. It's going to be commanding force, bishop coming on. So white played F4 to stop black from playing E5 or maybe knight E5. White plays F4, and after queen E7, E5. this is a total victory in a strategy, and basically this determined by the pawn structure that white created. You see, c5 and d4 pawns will never move. White will go bishop on c4. Knight on d7 is extremely restricted with white's e5 and f4 pawn. e6 pawn for black is weakness, and after bishop c4 and f5, on top of everything, white has very good chances for direct attack. What happened here after e5, rook to b8, bishop c4, king to h8, and queen to h3. You see white is attacking e6 pawn, and after knight f8 and b3, the position is totally lost for black. White is imminently coming f5. Definitely that's going to open the f file, and if you just compare the minor pieces, black's knight on f8 versus bishop on c4, that is going to open after f5, you will see that white has a murderous attack. Well, just if you want to see the rest of the game, just to show you, a5, f5, ef, rook takes f5, knight h7, rook f1. You see pawn structure determines, well, let white get powerful attack on a queen side and determines the course of the game. So now after queen d8, queen g3, this position could have been won many different ways. Rook e7, h4, restricting the movement of the knight on h7, rook b2, b7, e6, and after rook b to c7, queen e5, and after queen to e8, a4. And in this position, black resigned, because actually black did not resign. Black still made few moves, but I think they could have resigned right here, because there are no moves that can possibly make. Queen d8, rook f2 was played, and queen e8. All black can do just sit and wait what is going to happen to them, and nothing good is going to happen in this position. And rook 2 to f3, queen d8. It was slight time pressure. Bishop d3, queen e8, queen e4, knight f6, rook takes f6, pawn takes f6, rook takes f6. And you see the total spectators, both of black's rooks and queen on e8. They are spectating what's going to happen to their king. And after king g8, bishop c4, and king h8, queen f4, black simply gave up. The last few moves were not very important to observe, just to emphasize the total triumph of white strategy. Now, you could tell, don't get wrong impression that the way white won this game in the end, oh, well, maybe I cannot be as precise. No, let me tell you this. I would have played it differently. A lot of different players, strong players, could have played it differently, and there were way too many ways for white to convert that position into a win. We can go on and on and on endlessly. I would say at least maybe like 10 different ways this game could have been won. So Fischer only had a chance for one way, and that's what he executed. So that was very well played game and very interesting understanding of a pawn structure. Now, taking the way Fischer did when he played e4 and allowed black to play d4, it's not always that good. So notice that what he did, when he played e4 and he forced black to go d4, he had good grounds for it. And good grounds were that he made his bishop powerful piece, and he totally shut off the activity of black's knight. That decided the game. That was decisive in the game.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for OnlineChessLessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from OnlineChessLessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.